All right, I'm excited to be joined today by Leanne Hughes. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Andy, thanks so much. Great to be here. Always great to chat with you.
Yeah, so great to have you back on the show. I think we've had you on before. And of course, you and I have had so many great conversations over the years on your show, on my show, on Zoom, on text and Instagram. We're always following each other and keep in touch, especially doing similar things. And it's funny, you're one of those friends that, you think like, hey, she's a great friend, even though we've never actually met in person because we live on different continents.
Yeah, and it just shows that you can build really strong and meaningful connections without
Yeah.
meeting in person. So we're proving that. But hopefully we get to meet soon, right?
Well, we are changing that, right? We are going to meet soon because you are coming to speak at the Talent Development Think Tank Conference in February of next year. And you're coming all the way from Brisbane, Australia. So we know this is a special event. So I'm really, really excited to have you coming.
Well, thanks for the invite. And I don't usually jump on planes for 14 hours for anything. So Andy, it'll be worth it. And I'm so excited to meet you, meet your community, and also share a bit about, the work that I do in regards to facilitation workshops and everything else.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, let's start there. I know we've had you on way back in the past talking about facilitation, and you are someone that I always think of as kind of the foremost expert on facilitation best practices and putting together really great, engaging workshops. And I want to get into that today. But tell me about what the work that you're doing today. What does Leanne Hughes' business look like for the end of 2022 going into 23?
Yeah, it's really, I think the reason I started my business is because I don't like being pinned down to things. And so if you'd ask me what I'm doing, I'm doing a really wide variety of projects, but really a lot of it is on the backbone of forging connections, accelerating trust really quickly. And I think that relates to some work that I'm doing. The best example is, well, for me, is to give you examples of certain projects that I'm working on. One is really based on a conversation that we had with your talent development think tank community, it in 2020, in terms of how do you convert face-to-face workshops to virtual. So I'm still helping companies with that, because what a lot of companies and organizations have realized is that actually there are some benefits of keeping this virtual. We can, it's more inclusive, people that need to travel, all of that. But hang on, the work that we're doing right now in that space isn't so effective. So I'm doing consulting work in that. I'm also helping companies out with I'm sure you're talking about it as well, quiet quitting, the great resignation, just trying to secure great talent. So working on strategies related to that. And also, because I love podcasting, helping people out with creating podcasts, helping people book out their business. So I just love the fact that as a solopreneur, working under a personal brand, there's opportunities to sort of deep dive into various areas.
Yeah. And you build a great brand, you build a lot of relationships, and you find opportunities to do lots of different things. And you've gotten into some strategy work with organizations as well. And that's a great thing when you run kind of a solopreneur business like we do. You can pivot, you can go after something that you're more interested in. But you still got that kind of that bread and butter of, helping people create really great workshops. And it's interesting that you say, 2020, I remember where you spoke in the community and we talked about creating great virtual workshops, because at that time, everybody was frantically trying to figure out, okay, how do we convert to virtual, especially all these companies that had never really done any virtual workshops. And then for the last 2 years, 2020, all of 21, a little bit of 22, it seemed like almost every program was still virtual. And now we're starting to see some in-person programs come back, right? I know you've run some. I actually ran one yesterday. It was the first time I did the in-person version of my Own Your Career program that's been run only virtually for the last 2 years. How do you see companies making decisions now on whether a program needs to be in person or virtual?
Yeah, well, I think the most important question is, what is the value of being there live? And the secondary question is, what are we doing live that it's impossible to do virtually? So I think things like, if it's a regular stand-up meeting, if it's basically just agenda and discussion, decision-making, I still believe that can be done all virtually. So what is the point of being in person? And I think it's really about building that connection. And it sounds incredibly obvious, but I remember I was working in 2020 in Australia. I was working on a project for about 20 weeks. And for the first 6 weeks, I was on virtual calls with people, trying to build rapport. It was really quite difficult. And the 7th week, I actually got to fly up to the mine site. And I remember meeting one of the general managers in the kitchen, and basically we just gave each other a massive hug. And what was interesting in that 7th week is that the level of trust that I developed in that week helped go back to virtual work. And really, we just got to a level of connection and trust and really rapid understanding of the project so that we could revert back to the virtual work. So I think it's more, you use it to create a bit more momentum, to really accelerate things, but also I think to moderate what you're doing virtually as well. So I think the connection piece, hanging out, having a meal together, that is probably the value of it. What I tend to see companies where they, I think, are faltering when it's coming to making a decision is where they basically say, let's just all meet for a meeting in person, but they're not taking advantage of the fact that they can gather, they can do different things, they can hang out more in a social setting, because everything else really can be taken up over a Zoom or a Teams call.
Yeah, if you're really just coming together so that one person can communicate information to everybody else, then, it could be a Zoom call. Some might say it could be an email, right?
Video,
Or
yeah,
video that
podcast.
they send out, right? So are you taking advantage of the opportunities that are created when people are together in person, that personal connection? Another big factor, of course, is the cost, right? Because I'm looking at companies that are now running programs and saying, well, we've discovered we can run these virtually. We can include people from all different regions if we do it on Zoom or whatever virtual platform, and they can all be involved, and we're not flying them all into one place when they don't need to be there. Versus if you bring everybody together, there's obviously a real cost associated with that was just kind of understood before. And now it's like, well, we don't necessarily have to do that. So let's reevaluate and then make sure that it's really worth it for the times when we're going to do it.
Yeah. And I think the word that is cropped up, it's actually because of recency effect, and I'm actually doing a speech on it very soon, is that sense of belonging.
Mm,
But also, I mean, I've got a question for you. This is something that popped up for me
yeah.
earlier this week. I had a friend that posted around, was posting around art and culture when it comes to building a connection within a business. Do you think, Andy, I'm asking you this question, I'm really curious on your thoughts on this. We talk about connection, how people are more isolated and lonely than ever before, but it seems to be the business needs to take responsibility for that. Whereas I think community groups, sporting organizations, churches, I think there's other areas to get a sense of connection and belonging as well. And I sometimes think we're putting too much pressure on the business to be that for everyone. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's ever been the company's responsibility to create a sense of community. I think that's a great benefit. I think it's a worthy goal for an organization to create a culture that has a sense of community where people really enjoy being around each other and working with each other, whether it's in person or virtual. They get excited about it. They want to support each other. They have friends at work. I think there are studies that would support that, the more connections and friends you have at work, the more likely you are to stay, right? Retention goes up, attrition goes down. But like you said, through much of life and history, we've also found community through, our local town, our church, our community center, sports that we participate in, school, things like that. There are other avenues. So as with anything, I think there's a mix. I think it's healthy if the community, if the company will provide opportunities, and we need people to take personal responsibility, right? To take ownership of their career and their experience. That said, I do think there's a challenge, a lot of opportunities out there for leaders, especially who could be checking in more on the people they're working with and finding out what's going on with them, communicating better, building that connection, because there's an assumption I think that people make a lot of times that's out of sight, out of mind. And like, if I don't hear from them, then
They're okay.
she's probably fine, when it's not the case. In fact, I actually realized, just as an example, today I have a virtual assistant who works for me on the other side of the world. He's in the Philippines. He does a lot of our graphics and marketing material. And I hadn't heard from him for several days. So I just shot him a message today on WhatsApp. And instead of saying, hey, why haven't you done the work that, I wanted you to do, it was, hey, are you okay? What's going on over there? Because I haven't heard from you in a while. And he came back to me right away and said, yeah, I'm fine. We're just catching up on things. So everything's okay. But can we connect with people on a personal level? Can we check in with them? Because as you and I both know, people are humans, and they have a lot of stuff going on, usually below the surface, usually hidden. Like, you don't know what people are dealing with at home.
Yeah, exactly. And you're absolutely right. And I think that is such a fundamental part of leadership. And I'm a person, I know this, like, and I teach leadership development, as do you, Andy, but sometimes I remember when there's pressure and things are, you just want to jump into a meeting and be like, hey, what's happening? Like, where are we going with this project? And you kind of forget that. So
Yeah.
even people that teach it, we have to remind ourselves to build that connection. But look, you do it all the time. Even prior to recording, Andy was checking in on me, like talking about the holiday. We weren't even
Of
talking about the
course.
podcast, for the first 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
once you start doing it, it becomes a practice. And I think that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, and some people are naturally inclined for that. I'm always looking to build personal connections and find out about people. And I've actually had for myself to get better at cutting that off and getting down to business. So I have time for those things, right? But for many leaders, they're so business minded and like, let's get down to business. They forget to check in with people on a human level. And a lot of people need that. They want to know that they're cared for. And I think I've heard you talk about this in the past. Do you do some element of this when you lead workshops? How do you find a way to check in with people and acknowledge them as humans before just getting down to business?
Yeah, there's a few different ways that I do that. I mean, one is I always start the workshop before it's actually started. So,
Mhm.
even before an official workshop, I'll always jump in like 10 minutes early, and I'll tell my Zoom producer to let people into from the waiting room. I don't sort of have an official start because I want to build the conversation as people are dripping in. That serves two purposes. One, back to your point on building that connection, making people feel at ease. But the second reason I do it is because when other people join the workshop, they're like, oh, wow, this conversation's already started. It's going to be interactive. So I set that scene from the beginning. The other way, I mean, just once it's started, is I kind of I have like a 3-question sequence. So the first question is always completely irrelevant to the topic that we're talking about. And it could be, what's your 3 p.m. snack of choice?
Mm.
Would you rather live somewhere it's hotter or colder? Like, just generic questions that anyone around the world can answer.
Yeah.
And then the third question, then, if we're doing a program about leadership development, might be, who is a leader that you've loved working with? So
Mm.
it kind of just, I talk about going from low friction to create the ease of entry. And then the third question is then like the pivot question to move into the topic at hand.
Yeah. I'm curious, that question, who is a leader that you've loved working with? Do you then utilize that? Is there a purpose behind that question?
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it's easier to think of, and actually we talk about this in my Flip Chart Facebook group a lot, is sometimes it's easier to flip the question and ask, who is a leader that you've hated working for and why? I
Right.
mean,
People think of that right away.
yeah, it really depends on like what kind of atmosphere you want to create. Sometimes it creates laughter, but it can be a bit negative as well. And
Mm.
so I'll make a decision on the spot.
Yeah, he's here in the room.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, so we'll take, might even like park those responses and see what the general themes are. And then as we're talking about leadership, referring back to the list. So it could be self-awareness, it could be they had great listening skills.
Mm.
Usually something that someone says and the attributes of a leader fit beautifully into the content at hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that question. That's why I was curious, and I assumed, and it sounds like you did. You don't just ask who was a leader you liked working with, but why did you really benefit from or enjoy working with them? And then you can sort of crowdsource some of those responses and sometimes look for commonalities of like, oh, these are people that challenged me, that cared about me, that held me accountable, that helped me, get to different roles in different places. And one reason I love that question too, when I ask people like, who was a leader that really helped you get where you were, or a leader you love working with, is because I think that's also a great example of legacy. And when you think about for leaders today, there's always that challenge of, for me, I think leadership is all about enabling and empowering your people to succeed, right? And that could be moving on to other roles, but there's always that fear of like, I don't want to lose my people. When you ask people about the best leader they ever worked for, it was someone that really helped them excel in their career and get to the next level. And those are the leaders that they always remember, not the ones that held them back or hoarded them.
Yeah, I really love that question too. And even when it comes to like, if I'm running a presentation skills workshop, it's putting someone in the seat of like, what's the best presentation that you went to and why? And I think often it's really interesting what we tend to experience. That's what we should start then role modeling. So but what's interesting, sometimes I work with groups and like, oh, I sat through a presentation, there were no slides, yet when they run a presentation, they have to put up slides. So it's actually just shining the mirror on what do you enjoy? So being led or being a participant in a group experience, and then how can you start doing more of that in the work that you do? So it really plays on what they appreciate. So you're not having to convince them because that's what they like. It's like, now how do we get you doing the same thing? Yeah,
experiential learning, having people self-discovery, right, to figure it out for
that's it.
themselves, discovery
Yeah, it's the
based
best way to learn.
versus telling them, right? I know I don't like anybody telling me anything. I want to discover it for myself. So getting back to virtual workshops, 'cause it sounds like what you're talking about, these best practices to connect with people is you're giving more examples from a virtual standpoint, letting people into the Zoom room. For people in L&D that are creating workshops or running workshops that have been in this challenge of taking things that are in person and moving into virtual or want to create better virtual workshops, what are some best practices or some things you tell people like, here's where you need to start?
Yeah. I would, so where you don't start, but where it is tempting to start is basically open up your existing facilitator guide slides and go, all right, yeah, we can just put these and we just translate and convert these to virtual. I would never start there, but that's initially what I did. It was a bit of a trap.
Yeah.
So I'd actually step away from the computer, grab your guides. I put a 10-minute timer on and really get back to purpose. Like, what is the purpose of this? So the trap is, oh, we had an all day in-person workshop, so we'll have to do an all day in virtual workshop. Everything is up for grabs. Timing is up for grabs. Who's included? The group sizes, like everything, all these questions are actually open. And it goes back to purpose. What do you want people to do? What is the point of a live call? And what I've been doing recently is recognizing that just having content in the workshops, like you said before, just having one person talk, that could be a video, it could be a private podcast. So now I'm trying to figure out the different media that can interplay. And in some of the programs that I've been working on, the leadership development content or the facilitation content has been delivered through a private podcast on demand, so that when we get to a live workshop, which may be like an hour or 90-minute conversation, it's pure set up for the conversation. It's not just a replay of the live learning materials. So that's one thing, is like just recognizing that the current program and the structure can be completely redesigned, but really goes back to what do you want to achieve from your group.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
beginning with the end in mind. And a mistake I think a lot of us make is like, well, it's already been created, so let's just adjust it, tweak it, and move it over to virtual. And I've, certainly done that in the past. Versus like, could we just start completely over and think about what do we want people to learn? What do we want them to do? What do we want the result to be? How could we best achieve that in a virtual environment?
yeah, that's it. And I think I contrast I keep talking about, but the second that we're in front of a screen, we kind of expect to be entertained.
Mm.
And in face-to-face, there's more room for you to like, because there's constant sort of interaction, you're seeing things in real time. In the virtual environment, if basically I've got maybe a paragraph or two or 5 minutes of talking, I'll have to stop. And I want to bring in contrast, whether it's an activity, a question, a poll, or something, just to mix up what is actually happening in that virtual room. And I think the contrast element, that's sort of what I'll run my agenda through. Is there a good mix of activity, of interaction all the way through this?
Hang on a second. Gotta sneeze.
Go for it. Oh, you're on mute now.
Now I'm muted. Okay. That's great. I think this is a challenge that a lot of people are still dealing with, right? Is this decision of, should this be, first of all, should it be training in the first place, which we kind of addressed, right? Or could it be a video or an email or a meeting or whatever? Second of all, should it be in person or virtual? And then third of all, how do we make this really engaging so that people feel like it's worth their time? And really starting with that end in mind and think about all those tactics. So I like what you mentioned. This is something I learned from you and I've been trying to get better at as well, is just changing things up, like you said, to kind of, what's the word? It's like,
it's like a scene change. Like, so
yeah,
if you're watching like a camera angle, like when you're watching anything on YouTube, anything not on YouTube, anything on Netflix or something that's quite engaging, the camera scene will switch every 5 seconds.
yeah.
And as viewers, we're really used to that. And so I think it's, I don't have like 17 different cameras here.
Yeah, I know that's what I need to do maybe.
But my Zoom producer, he'll go from So when I ask a question, like I'll be full, like when I'm presenting a content or a model, right? It'd be Leanne, full screen, no slides. So I can demonstrate it. I might have a flip chart behind me. I might throw up some Post-it notes, right?
Yeah.
Then when I ask a question, he'll flick to gallery view. So now everyone's in screen, and that's a prompt for people to actually respond.
Yeah, I like that.
Engine.
I started trying to get, I started making a little bit more of these scene changes, especially in the virtual keynotes I do as a result of listening to you and talking to you about this. So I might be leading a virtual keynote and showing slides, but then I'll take the slide off and go to me as a talking head, right? And then go back to a slide, especially if I'm trying to make a really important point at something, maybe like stop sharing slides so they actually see me, which I think about a lot of times with the way Zoom and other virtual platforms are set up. When you share slides, that's like 90% of the screen, even though, they're hiring me, or you have an executive or someone who's speaking to people, they can't even really see them. I think the platforms are getting better. I've noticed with Microsoft Teams now, they have like 4 different options where you could put the slide behind you or next to you, that sort of thing. And I'm sure Zoom will get there very soon as well. But we got to think about, again, going back to that human element and why are people there? And they want to learn the concepts, but they also want to learn from a person and potentially connect with that person as well.
Yeah, that's it. And the slides, yeah, a lot of the time then what value are they adding to the presentation? And I remember the one time I was presenting to a government organization, and I honestly just had the agenda on a flip chart behind me. So I was like, going through each point, crossing it out. And they're like, oh, we love the flip chart. We love that we can see where we are as part of this. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is so old school. Like, it's just and
Yeah.
even the post-it, it's like, oh, we love the colors of the post. People were just, that was a novelty, because
Yeah.
slides are like the default. So if you actually bring in other things, and I love getting people to be tactile and engage with the presentation by like
Yeah.
writing things down, like even if then, because they're physically engaging with it, even though they're working from home.
Yeah. When I ran, I run this community, the Talent Development Think Tank, which you've spoken in before. And we ran a retreat back in January. I had a few different members lead sessions, and we made a rule: there's no projector, no slides. I just didn't even pay for the projector at the hotel, so there was no option. And I remember there was a comment from somebody who was there, said, "This is the lowest tech day I've had, and the most engaging day I've had in a long time." And so we're bringing that back for the Think Tank conference, as you know, because you'll be running a session there, that our breakouts will have no projectors and no slides. So it's just you and a
Amazing.
flip chart, which I know you're right at home with.
Look, I'll probably be bringing in some painter's tape as well,
Okay.
and maybe a bell. So I'll bring in other props, but no slides. I think it's total freedom. But I mean,
Yeah.
I've sat in Alan Weiss speeches for 2 days, and he just has 2 flip charts, and he owns it, and it's completely
Yeah.
compelling, interactive, awesome. But what the presenter has to get good at is then, how do you engage? How are you telling interesting stories? What questions are you asking? I think it's the best. I think it's wonderful that you've done that, and it'd be a great experience for everyone involved, including the person delivering the workshop.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I went to an Alan Weiss workshop last year on your recommendation, and it was a great day. It was a 1-day, full day, and 1 or 2 flip charts, no slides, just like you said. And he owned it, right? Whatever he wanted to talk about, he put a model on a flip chart, and then we talked about it, and then we moved to the next thing, and he never
Yeah.
needed a slide. And the interesting thing about that, I never really thought about it until right now, is when a facilitator is drawing a model on a flip chart that they obviously could have had on a slide, right? It feels very personal to you in that moment, right? Like, they're creating it. He's doing it just for me and my group right now. He's probably presented it 1,000 times before, but it feels like it's just for us. And it's a more engaging tactic.
100%. And it's like, the grand reveal, particularly if it's like a 2x2 or a van or something, you talk through each element, and then you kind of in your seat going, oh, what's next? And actually, a hack for anyone that is not confident yet in terms of like just live drawing is just grab a light colored pencil, and you can actually prep your flip charts beforehand in pencil.
Mm.
So then you're tracing over it in real time. That's something
Oh, I never thought about that.
yeah.
I have another tactical, I'm going to get tactical for a second, question about flip charting. Um, I get a little bit nervous sometimes when I'm going to a flip chart and I'm in front of a room, because I've heard the advice, never turn your back to an audience. And of course, the second thing is that if I'm going to continue speaking while I'm writing, then I'm potentially speaking away from the audience instead of to them. What's your best practice on that?
Oh, there's a guy on my podcast who's excellent at this, on body language, Michael. I'm going to have to, I can't believe I've forgotten his name. He's like actually a world leader. His brother started NLP. So hopefully
Oh,
I think of his last name soon. But yeah, so when you're on the flip chart, well, I'm left-handed. So I'll stand, your writing arm should also always be the one closest to the flip chart. So you write, then you turn and talk. So you want to keep the invitation open. As opposed to having to lean over the other side of the flip chart. Does that make sense, Andy?
yeah. And
So
by the way, that was, I believe, episode 102 of the First Time Facilitator podcast with Mark Bowden. Is that right?
No, it
Oh,
was
that's a
my
different one. All right, cancel that. Fen, take that out.
yeah. Oh gosh, he's
I'll deal with that.
phenomenal.
Did you say Michael something?
Let me find it. Yeah.
Oh my God, body language. I thought I had it. I was like, oh, I got this.
I mean, he's
Oh, Michael Kelly,
Grinder.
is that it?
No, Michael Grinder.
Oh,
Michael Grinder, Grinder.
Okay.
So Michael Grinder has YouTube videos all about nonverbal body communication. Mark Bowden is a genius in it as well, but Michael Grinder actually does specifics on where you should stand in the flip chart, signaling with your body language as well, if you really want to get into the detail.
Okay. So signaling, being intentional with body language, but I might have gotten distracted trying to figure out who it was. So if I'm going to the flip chart, do I just write and not speak, or do I keep speaking as I'm writing, facing away from the audience? Or you said,
I would,
turn?
yeah, I would draw and then turn, but where you can, if you, it depends on where your flip chart is. If it's right in the center of the room, that makes it harder. It depends on where it's positioned, but always keep your body open to the group. Like, don't completely shut yourself off when you write. So what that means is the hand that you're writing with has to be the one closest to the flip chart. So you're not completely turned around. So you're keeping it open.
Right-handed or left-handed.
Yeah. And that's why, and my biggest problem with flip charting, my handwriting is so messy, and I want to write fast because I want to get back to explaining the message. Yeah. So I've really got to be like controlled and think about it. And we think it takes longer than it actually does, but it really doesn't.
Yeah, I know. It's similar to, as a speaker and a facilitator, especially if you're an extrovert like me, like us. It's that silence that is always uncomfortable, right? And if I think, oh, I'm writing for 5 seconds and I'm not speaking, then somehow everybody's just going to leave the room. They're like, I'm done. I can't.
No, it's actually a really good breather for them. Like, and they probably need it. I'm exactly the same as you. They probably need a break from hearing us.
This is a good point. I love when we just get really tactical on this. And you also use this in virtual sessions as well, right? You use the I've seen you use the whiteboard a feature in Zoom, which is something that I have hardly ever used.
I don't use the whiteboard feature. I use my iPad, and people are just, they're like, how do you do that? It's like an X Factor thing still is using the iPad. So I've got the iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil. I use the app. It's called Notability. So I use it a few different ways, and I can want to talk tactics, but one is sometimes I can bring in slides, like export slides into that and draw over the top. Otherwise, it's just a completely blank screen. I can add in images. I can clip things. It's so versatile. You can put Giphies in there as well.
And how does that connect into show on Zoom?
Yeah, so I just, you can 2 ways. One is connect via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and the second way is connect via cable. The cable is more reliable. So I always like plug the iPad in, it charges, and then I talk and scribe that way. And different colors, it just brings it to life. You can see people actually leaning in when the iPad is there. Same reason that you said before, once you draw in real time, people are like, oh wow, this is for us.
Yeah, I'm doing this for you right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, this is good stuff. This is some good tactics right here. I hope people are writing this stuff down and going to be using some of this. I want to pivot and get into some marketing tactics, because your session at the think tank is going to be not just about how to create great programs, but how do you market those programs and get people to show up? Because I think I've talked about this in the think tank community that we run, and I've heard people sort of complain about this, that like you could put all this effort into creating a great program, and then you put it out there and nobody shows up or nobody knows about it because everybody's got a lot of stuff going on. Right. Yeah. And so your whole thing is like getting people to be excited to show up to a program, not be like just showing up because somebody told them to.
Yeah, well, the whole thing became the whole thing. I mean, I've got a flip chart group and I always pay attention to the questions that are in there. And sometimes I'll just create a podcast episode about that. I
Mm.
think this is a couple of years ago, posted, how do I get people to show up to a workshop without telling them it's mandatory? And I was like, oh, that's super cool. So I did a whole podcast about it. I mean, it does definitely relate to create a great experience, because ultimately you want that word of mouth within the business. But I think it's the same. The number one thing that I think us as facilitators, workshop hosts, trainers don't really consider is we stack all the effort into creating the content, but we don't actually think, what is the sexiest title I could give this workshop? So anyone that's listening to this podcast, I want you to think about, why did you click play on this episode? And Andy, you better call this a really good title. You better call this episode no pressure.
It's going to be good.
It could be a couple of reasons. I mean, a couple of reasons. Like, one, it could be, oh, they know Leanne, so we want to hear about facilitation, or facilitation is actually a real pain point for me right now, so this is going to hit the spot, whatever it is. But that has to really appeal to your target audience. And often we see, programs called Leadership 101 or communication skills or time management. I mean, that's not appealing. That's not appealing at all. So the example that I gave was when I was working, I used to work for it's like a community college in Western Australia. So we were marketing these programs, and one was email management, and no one signed up. No one. So we changed the title to Email Hell to Email Heaven, and it sold out. We had 80 people sign up for this breakfast on Email Hell to Email Heaven, and that was the lesson that I had. It was the same program. Nothing changed. It was just the title. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we're going to call this episode, how to get out of debt, and save your marriage and have the life that you want and love and travel 24/7 with Leanne Hughes. We'll see. With just whatever everybody wants, just bring it in. No, I'm with you. There's a reason why you think about companies putting out content on the internet or the, podcast, whatever it is, right? Like, people spend a lot of time, the best ones, being thoughtful about, what is that title? People talk about quote clickbait, right? Essentially, like, what's going to get people to click. I don't spend enough time on that, but thinking about podcast episodes, I absolutely, like, I have lots of podcasts I listen to, and I scroll through and, like, okay, what do I want to listen to today? Or does that topic seem interesting to me or not? And a lot of it has to comes down to the title. So I like that, Email Hell to Email Heaven. Opening loops with questions, I find it works a lot as well, right? Like, asking the question that a lot of people might be wondering themselves, and then obviously they assume you're going to be answering that question in the workshop.
Yeah. And I mean, I gave the example earlier of creating a podcast episode based on a question that I received. And I'll talk about this in our session in Sonoma, but it's actually using the language of the people that you're targeting as opposed to what you think they need. And so listening is the essential skill here, being observing, but not projecting what you think. Because if you're the person running the workshop or you're the expert in the topic, it's hard to relate to where people are in their journey. And so you have to either go, be very clear and go back to where you were 2 or 3 years ago, if that's the stage that you were at, or you actually have to say how, ask them, like, what does this look like? How does it feel like? And then use the language back to then craft the title and the objectives as well.
Yeah. So instead of something about time management or productivity, it's really addressing what is it they're thinking and feeling, which is, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to get everything done. Or there's these important things that I want to do, but I never get to them because I'm always getting crushed by all these urgent emails.
Yeah. How do I get out of these 7 useless meetings I've got on my calendar today? I mean, you'd have to be pretty brave to run that workshop internally, right? But this is what people are thinking. Like, yeah.
I like it. Well, I'm looking forward to this. So, and it sounds like this is not going to be death by PowerPoint. Obviously, I've already said you're not going to have any slides. You're not allowed to in this session. But it sounds like you're going to be making this engaging. You've got a bell. You've got painter's tape. You got stuff coming. So, what can people expect from your session at the Think Tank conference?
I think it's quite different from any other session that will be run, because it really has that marketing slant. And I think the success that I had in my business working as an OD advisor and consultant was that 50% of my energy was actually focused on the marketing and getting the attention of the people in the group. And then the experience that led after that. Whereas I think traditional learning practitioners really focus on the learning objectives, but they're missing that marketing piece. So I think, yeah, we're going to have, I mean, a ripper of a time. You'll hear an Australian accent for 45 minutes. I'll have to probably slow down and maybe, maybe like use less Australian terms when we catch up. There'll be like things like, I don't know about if I'll bring in a checklist, but definitely some type of tool, if it's a template to help you figure out like how to market these workshops so that you get people signing up, booking out, and they're getting an ROI on your function in your department within your organization. And then obviously the knock-on effects of building the skill as well. So
Yeah.
ton of fun, no slides, lots of activity, interaction, whatever we can cram into 45 minutes.
I love it. And if there's one thing I learned about people in L&D, not only they like engaging workshops, but they love handouts too. So if you happen to bring a tool or a handout, last question, Leanne, you weren't at our first conference, but you are coming to this one. And I think you have a pretty good idea of what I stand for and what we're putting together for people that are maybe on the fence thinking about going to this conference. Why should they go?
Well, I think the timing is perfect. February, like it's the beginning of a new year, there's new possibilities. I think the diversity and range of presenters there is amazing, but also the fact that you have created an experience where it's all about the connection and the conversation. It's not just about the content. I think that is the real differentiator here. So I think it's going to be such an honor to be in this room and feel that buzz of energy, and not only get the content, but figure out what you need to do, how you can do things differently, how you can get inspired, but bring that into your business and not wait to do that. Like I think the fact that it's action oriented is a real bonus. Plus Andy's awesome. It'll be great fun.
So is Leanne Hughes. It's going to be great to have you there. It's going to be a great conference. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, make sure you go grab those at tdtt.us/conference. And Leanne, if anybody wants to reach out to you, I know you've got the First Time Facilitator podcast. You've got the Work and Live Large podcast. And then the other work you're doing is all on your website. Is it leannehughes.com?
Yes, leannehughes.com, and LinkedIn is, of course, connected to Andy there. So you can find me, Leanne Hughes. I'm just posting up fun, insightful things. I hope they're insightful most days of the week.
I see you've been putting a lot of great stuff out on Instagram and YouTube as well. Just creating the brand, trying to help people out wherever they are. Well, Leanne, thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to see you in Sonoma.
Yeah, thanks for the chat, Andy. All the best. See you soon.